In this video, we'll build up a Google style search bar in Angular using the Angular CDK overlay package and the Angular material components such as material list. Our search bar will have a nice drop down containing our recent searches. We can use any of these searches, we can delete any of these searches, and whenever the user searches for a particular term, it is automatically added to our recent searches. And as a bonus, when we refresh, the recent searches are stored in local storage so it persists the information. Hey everyone, I'm Zoeb Khan and I'm a senior front-end engineer. Here on this channel, I build cool web apps with the Angular framework and hopefully I inspire you to do the same. Okay, so without further delay, let's start with our Gmail inspired Google search bar. Alright, so let's do the first thing, which is to create a new Angular project. And I'm going to be using the Angular version 17.2, which is the latest version, and the Angular CLI. So let's do ng new. We're going to name it as Angular search bar. And a few styles I like to use: inline templates and inline styles, and that's it. I'm going to use a SAS file format and no server-side rendering and no static generation. Now it's installing the packages and let's just wait for a bit. Great, so now it's installed. The next thing we need to do is to go into its folder. So we're gonna do Angular search bar and then open VS Code. So once in VS Code, you can see that we have our basic app ready here. The first thing we need to do here is then to install the Angular material package, because we're going to be using the CDK package which comes bundled with Angular material. So let's do ng add Angular material. Okay, so it's going to ask me whether I should proceed. I want to proceed, and it's going to install the packages. Okay, for the theming, I'm going to select Indigo Pink, and for the Angular material topography style, I'm going to enable them and also enable the animations. Great, so our packages are now installed. Okay, so now let's start building our app. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to go in our app.component and we're going to remove the initial things that we have. We don't want this anymore. Let's just put this a bit down here so that we can actually see our code more clearly. So the first thing we need to do here is to import the toolbar. We're going to create a simple toolbar at the top which can contain our search bar. So I'm going to do Angular material toolbar, and here in the imports I'm going to do mat toolbar. Okay, note I did not need to use Angular mat toolbar module because in version 17.1 we can actually dispense with that. So here we're going to do mat toolbar, and I'm going to not change the color for this because I need it to be grayish. So inside of the mat toolbar, now we need to create the search bar. So let's create a search bar component here. Let's do ng gc, and we're going to put all our components or widgets or parts of the component inside a components folder. So let's do ng-gc components, and inside of this we are going to do the search bar component. Great, so our component has been added here, as you can see, and let's import that component here as well, and then inside this. Great, let's also remove this title because we don't need it. Okay, and let's now see how things look. Okay, let's go to localhost this, and we have this open here, and you can see that our search bar works here. Okay, let's split this screen a bit so that we can easily see the visual feel of the search bar in action here. Okay, so let's go into our app search bar now, and let's remove this. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to just add a div, and if you notice the visual feel of the Gmail inspired search bar, it is basically an input field inside of a basic container. So we're going to create a container here. We're going to give a class of search bar container. Okay, and for the styles, we are going to add some initial styles to the search bar container. Now I'm just going to copy these styles in a bit here. I'm not going to go over all of them because that's not the subject of this video, but you can see that we have some initial padding, a bit of a background, a border radius to make it all round, and then we have a display flex to align things in the center. So let's just see how this looks. Okay, because there's no content in this, so you can't really see anything. Okay, so to add some content, the first thing we need to add is to have an input inside of it. Okay, and let's call the placeholder for this input as search my app. Great, so now we can see an input, although it's not styled that well. So what we're going to do is we are going to, in the search bar container itself, we are going to add some styles to the input as well here. So inside of the input, we are going to change the font sizes and the width and the heights and the outlines so that it closely resembles what we want. And you can now see that it looks a bit similar to the Gmail search bar. So let's also add a host display block to the search bar. And also before that, we would like to add a search button here at the start. Now to add the search button, we need to import our material components. So we're going to do material and also the icon. Okay, and we're going to only import the specific things that we need. So we only need the matte icon button and the matte icon, not the whole button module. Okay, so before that input now, we are going to add our matte icon button, which is going to be something like this. And we're going to use the directive matte icon button. Inside of it, we're going to declare our matte icon. Which icon we should use? Obviously, this will be the search icon. And let's see how this looks. Okay, now you can see that because of the icon, we had some basic padding that is applied. So it works. It looks really nice now. Okay. Now also to closely match, the Gmail search app, we want to change this toolbar color to something different. And to do this, what we're going to do is we are going to use the new design tokens based or it's the CSS properties based material properties, and we're going to change those in our styles.cs. So in our body here, for example, we would like to add a matte toolbar container background color and make this ghost white. Now when we change this, you're going to notice that the color of our toolbar changed and it looks more like the Gmail toolbar as well. Okay. So that's just a small tidbit in the latest versions because we can change CSS custom properties. Okay, so our search bar now looks similar to the Gmail search bar, and this looks good. So the next thing we need to do is just to add our overlay, which we want to show when we click on this input field here. So how to add that overlay now? Now, why are we using the CDK overlay? And why are we not using the Angular material menu component or the dialog component? Now, both of these components actually come on top of the user, and material menu itself only allows a little bit of customization, and it doesn't allow full control over the overlay about when it will close and when it will open. So I wanted something more customizable for this search bar because it has a lot of functionality inside of it which we want to do in a custom way. So what we're going to use is we are going to use the building blocks of the material menu and the dialogues, which is actually the Angular CDK overlay package. So to do that, what we're going to do is we are going to import the CDK overlay module, and let's import overlay module here. So for the overlay module or the overlay package, Angular provides some directives which we can apply to our elements which we want to associate with the overlay. So one of those directives is the CDK overlay origin directive. Now this CDK overlay origin directive basically tells the CDK package that this is the element in the DOM besides which should the CDK overlay appear in front of the user. Okay, so sort of the triggering element, but not exactly, because you can trigger the opening and the closing with some other component, but this is basically the positioning of the overlay. Okay, so for CDK overlay origin, we are going to specify it here, and then we are going to create a variable here called overlay position, let's say, and we're going to export the CDK overlay origin here. So once we are done with that, we can now define our overlay here, and that we do in an ng template. Now an ng template means that it's not going to be automatically shown on the DOM, and this is just to specify what the content of the overlay should be. So ng template is going to then specify here CDK connected overlay. So this is basically a connected overlay. A connected overlay is a type of a CDK overlay which appears close to some element, like a pop-up menu or sort of a tooltip. So these are overlays which are connected CDK overlays. Okay, then we're going to specify CDK connected overlay origin, and in the origin we're going to specify as overlay position. Great. Okay, there's another directive or property that we can use, and that is open. Now this property is going to control whether the overlay is open or not. And since I mentioned that we want to actually make this behavior custom to our own needs, so we are going to control it through the use of a signal. And when we change the signal, it will change the state of the overlay from open to close or to close to open. So here we need to create a signal. Now, since this signal is going to be shared across multiple components, we are going to have a sort of a sub-components as well. I would really like to keep it in a separate service so that we can share it. So let's create a service for that purpose. Let's create a new service here. We're going to do ng service, and in a services folder we're going to put all our services. Let's call this search bar service, which is going to contain all of the functionality, all the variables, and all of the data that we need for the search bar component itself. So the service is created. Let's go in our service, search bar service, and here we are going to just declare a signal called overlay open. This is going to be a writable signal, and it's going to have an initial value of false. And as you can see, the type it automatically infers as a boolean, which is what we want. So let's go back to the search bar component then, and here in our component class we are going to inject the search bar service, okay, and then we are going to create a reference to our overlay open signal here. And now here we are going to specify this overlay open. Okay, so as you can see, we are using the value of the overlay open here. So that's really important thing to keep in mind when using signals. Okay, so we have overlay open, which is controlled by this. So let's test this out and let's see whether it appears or not. And let's write here hello. And now when we save this, nothing is going to happen obviously because the overlay open initial state is false. Now let's change the state to true to test whether this appears. And you can see that the overlay appears with like sort of floating in mid-air because we haven't really styled it well, but it appears. So that means that the CDK overlay package is working. Okay, so we can open our CDK overlay, but what we want to do is we want to trigger it when the user clicks on the input. So where is our input? Here is our input. We can actually simply just write click is equals to, and we can just do overlay open dot set, and we can do true. And let's make this false initially, and let's now test this. And when we click on this, we can see that the overlay opens. Okay, so now we can open the overlay, but how to close this? Now we want the overlay to close when the user clicks any of the places outside the overlay. So now Angular CDK, it provides an event handler called overlay outside click handler. And let's add this here. Let's call this overlay outside click. And what we can do is that we can do overlay open dot set false. That means we can close the overlay. Okay, so now when we click on the search my app input field, we can see that the overlay is open. And when we close this by clicking outside, you can see that it closes. When we open it again, and when we click on this, it doesn't close. So click outside is working well. Okay, so this works well. Let's style this overlay now so that it looks more like how we want it to look. So let's create a component to contain all of this style. So let's do ngGC, and we are going to add a new component to our components folder. We're going to call this search overlay. Now we are dividing this into components because I can foresee that in the future we might need to add a lot of different parts to the overlay itself. So it is a good idea to actually split this into multiple components beforehand. Okay, so ngGC component search overlay, and let's do app search overlay here. And this is a nifty trick that you can use. So when you use a quick tip, you are going to see that you can import search overlay component, and it's going to do it automatically, as you can see now. Great. So let's go into our search overlay now, and let's build up our overlay. Okay, so let's build a new div here first of all. And within this div, or rather we are going to assign a class to this div called overlay container, and we're also going to give it some elevation, which is the built-in elevation class which comes with Angular material. And we need some components here that we want to use. So we need a mat divider here. So we're going to do Angular material divider. Let's import mat divider here, and we're going to do mat divider. And then below this, we are going to use the material action list component, which is provided by Angular material itself. Now that visual feel is similar to the Google material design specification, so it's a good idea to use that. Okay, so but what is the data that we want to iterate on? So to create that data, we would need to create a recent searches signal, which is going to contain our data to show in that list. So let's go over to our search bar service again, and we are going to create a new signal here. And let's call this signal as recent searches. This is also going to be a writable signal, but the type for this is going to be an array of strings. So I'm going to give an initial value here just to get started. So just so that we can test the UI first. So let's say I write here Angular, let's say RxJS, let's say signals, and maybe component store. So all of my favorite things, and that's done. Recent searches is there. So now we need to use these recent searches in our search overlay component. So let's go back to the search overlay component and let's create the list that we want to use. So we are going to import the Angular material list. I would like to import the whole module here this time because we need to use a lot of directives that are provided by the matlist module and I don't want to include them one by one. So let's start with creating the mat action list first. Okay, now this mat action list will have all of our recent searches. So for the mat action list, we are going to use the new control flow loop, the for loop, and we are going to do search of, now what should it iterate on? So we are going to use the recent searches and let's include the search bar service again. And you can see the services provide us a very good way to actually share signals which we need to use in our components. So let's do recent searches and this is going to be this dot search bar service dot recent searches. Okay, so search of recent searches, and here I'm just going to track the search term itself because it's going to be unique and I don't want it to repeat. So now this track function is another story itself which I'll cover in a different video, but this ensures that your list or your iteration here is as performant as possible. Okay, so now in this for loop we are going to add our list items one by one. So let's create a list item here, and in this list item we are going to first add the mat icon. Now to add the mat icon we need to include it, so mat icon, and let's add a mat icon first. And we have the history icon. We would need to give it the built-in directive called mat list item icon. Then let's create a heading, and within that heading we are going to show of course our search term. So that's going to go here, and this heading is going to be the title basically. So we are going to give it the directive of mat list item title. Then last we also need to give a close button at the end so that we can delete these items. So this is going to be a mat icon button. Okay, we haven't included the mat icon button, so let's do that here, mat icon button. And now this button is going to have the mat icon of close, and also this will have the mat list item meta directive, which is going to ensure that this close button is basically at the very end of the list item on the right side. Great. Okay, let's see how this looks. So now when we click on it, you can see that it already looks a lot better and it's very close to what we want to achieve. But obviously there are some visual glitches which you would like to fix. The reason for those is that we would like our overlay container to actually have some specific style so that it can match our search bar as well. So let's add some styles to that. So let's add a class called overlay container here, and within that overlay container we're going to give some styles here. We're going to give a border radius to the drop down so that it matches the search bar itself, the minimum width, some background, and the padding bottom, so that the list does not bleed into our. See how this looks. Okay, this looks a lot better. Of course, there are some inconsistencies which we would like to fix, and one of these inconsistencies seem to be that the title is a bit spaced out differently and it's not aligning perfectly, and now that is because we have a default sort of margin to the h3 that we have added here. So let's change that in our styles. Yeah, so let's add style, and this is matte typography and h3 within it. So this should have margin as 0. And now let's see how this looks, and you can see that it's now perfectly aligned with the center. Okay, so the drop down basically looks really good, but one thing you will see is that the search bar styles don't actually match with the drop down. So we need to change these styles when the overlay is actually open. This is going to closely match the style that Gmail has in its own app. Okay, so to do that, we are going to go back to the search bar component and we need to make that change to the search bar container itself. So let's add some conditional formatting to it. We are going to use the ng class directive here, and let's use ng class here, the property. So we're going to import this first from Angular common. So once we import this, we need to change the visual layout of this specific search bar container. So we're going to add ng class here, and inside of it, we are going to enable two classes. One is the opened class, which you're going to assign it to the search bar container. And the second is the matte elevation Z2. We also want to apply this when the overlay is open. Now, since we are using overlay open for our custom handling, you can see that how easy it is now to change appearance based on our overlay state. So we're going to just use the signal called overlay open, and when it's open, it's going to apply these styles. So this is done. Now what we need to do is we need to just add the opened style so that we can mimic the style of our overlay. So in the search bar container, we are going to add a style here called and dot opened. So when the search bar container is there and the opened style is there as well, we want to make the background as white instead of the current blue, light blue, and we want the border radius to change as well. So the border radius should be 32 pixels, and then 0 pixels, 0 pixels. So from the bottom edges, we don't want the rounded edges in that case. Okay, let's try this out now. So now when we see and we refresh the app, now you can see that we have these nice rounded edges, and it goes back to the normal state when we close the dialog here. Great, so this all seems to be working fine. Great, so now what's left is that we need to add the functionality for the recent searches. For that, what we need to do is we need to add the input event handler first of all. So let's go in our search bar component and let's add an event handler here. We're gonna call this input.enter key, and here we need to do something when the user presses enter on the search bar. So let's create a function called search in our search bar component, and this is going to take in the search term, and it's going to do some things which we are going to add later. So let's call this search function here. But how do we get the search term? So now I've not used any ng model and stuff like that because I don't want to complicate it further, and we don't actually need any validations and stuff that come with the forms module. So I'm just going to use template variable here, and I'm going to call this search input, and in this search we are just going to use the search inputs value. Okay, so this is going to give us the value of the search term itself. Great. So now in this search, the first thing we need to do is to just check whether the search term is there or not. Now, if the search term is empty, we just want to return it. We don't want to do anything else. Okay, but if it's not empty, we are going to call a function of the search bar service, which is going to perform the search. Okay, let's go to the search bar service now and add this function here. So let's add a search function. Let's add the parameter for it. And now this search function is going to perform the search. Now I'm not adding the searching functionality because this is going to change according to the requirements of the app. And it also requires some other integrations maybe, or maybe some other way that you would want to perform search in the app. I'm restricting myself to the recent searches functionality. Okay, so we perform the search and you can do anything here. But after that, you need to add this to the recent searches. So let's add a function to add this to the recent searches. So add to recent searches, and let's do search term. Okay, so now this looks simple enough, but it's actually not. It requires a bit of manipulation. So the first thing we need to do is we need to ensure that all of the search terms are lowercase. So we are going to do constant lowercase term is equals to search term dot to lowercase. And then we're going to update the value of the recent searches so that we can add this term to that list. So once we get the lowercase term here, we want to just add the specific search term to the recent searches at the top of the list. Now we also want to make sure that if there are duplicate items in the list, we can actually remove them, and it sort of appears like the term has come at the top of the search, So to do that, what we're going to do is we're just going to use the recent searches signal. We're going to set its value. And since it's an array, the top of that value, or the first, would be the lower case term. Okay. And after that, we are going to use the recent searches signals value, but with a catch, because we are going to add a filter to it as well and remove that term if it was present in the list before. So what we're going to do is we're going to do s is not equals to lowercase term. Okay. So you have these add to recent searches, and we can just now use add to recent searches and add the search term here. One more thing we need to do before testing this out is to obviously also close the overlay. Now, since we are doing it in a custom way, we need to handle all of that ourselves. So let's close the overlay here and make this overlay open false. Great. So let's test this out now and see how this looks. And also, I think we haven't really called the search bar service from the search bar component. So let's do that quickly. Search bar service dot search, and let's send the search term with it. Okay, this input dot enter needs to be key down dot enter. So we are going to just test this now, and let's test hello here. When we put in hello here, it closes the overlay open, and when we open it back again, we can see hello is at the top of here. And if we sort of add something which is already in the list, like for example, we search for Angular again, it's going to close it. And now you can see that Angular is not there below this, but it come at the top. So this is exactly how we want it to appear. Okay, so this works fine. Now we need to add the function to delete the recent search. So how to do that? Now it will be similar to the same thing, but we are going to do it in the search overlay in this button here. So we want to add a click event handler here, and let's call this delete recent search to make it more clearer to see. And in this delete recent search, we are going to call this here, and we're going to pass in the search term selected. We are going to simply call a function of the search bar service as before. Let's go to the search bar service and let's add delete from recent search, or let's say delete recent search. Let's do the search term, and let's just simply use a filter for this purpose. So we're going to use recent searches dot set, and we're going to use the same thing, but we're just going to use a filter here, and we're going to say that the search term should not be this search term. So it's going to return all of the elements without this search term, effectively deleting it. So delete recent search is going to be called from the search overlay. So let's do this here, delete recent search, and let's do search term. Okay, so let's test this out now. And now we click on this and we want to remove a search. We can actually just click on this and you can see that it deletes it. And yeah, we don't have any search now. We can refresh it. It's going to get it back again. Okay, now what should happen when we click on the material list? So when we actually click on any of the items, it should perform the search, and this input field should also have that specific search field set to it. So how do we do that exactly? Now to do that, we will need to set a signal which sort of syncs with the input field itself so that we can set it when we need to. So let's create a new signal here in our search bar service, and let's call this signal as search term. And this is going to be an empty signal, but it's going to be a string. And then let's go to the search bar component, and in our input field, we can actually bind this signal to our input field. How do we bind it? So we can specify the search term here as well. And we can say this dot search bar service dot search term. And in this value, we can write search term. So whenever this search term changes, then our input field is going to update with this new value. Okay, so now what do we need when we actually click on this? So we need to perform the search. Now we already have a function for performing the search. So let's just reuse that function, and let's go to search bar service, and let's just in this perform this search. Along with this, we can also then change the search term to this search term that we get. And now what should we do? Now we only need to go back to our search overlay, and for each of the mat list items, we can add a click event handler. We can call this perform search, and then in this perform search, we can do, it should be a string, this dot perform this dot search bar service dot search with this search term. So this is going to automatically do all of the things which should happen when we actually perform the search. Okay, so let's test this out now. And now when we click on it and we want to select any of the recent searches, when we click on it, it's going to select this and show it on this, and then it also performs the search obviously. So you can see now that this works really nice. Okay, now we can add the recent searches list, we can delete from the recent searches, but when we refresh the app, it's not going to remember the recent searches. So it doesn't really make that much of a sense for the user, you know. So to make it really useful for the user, we need to store it, you know, either in a backend or in some place in the browser as a form of a cookie or in some local storage. So in my case here, I'm just going to use local storage. To add a local storage quickly, it's really simple. We are going to go in our search bar service, and we're going to go in our recent searches. We are going to remove this initial values, and instead of the initial values, we are going to get the values from the window.local storage. Let's keep a parameter key as recent searches. And of course, you get a sort of a string a value which you need to convert into an object. So to do that, we are going to do json.parse because we want to store an array. Now, one issue here obviously is that it can also be null because it will be null initially. So in that case, what we're going to do is we are just going to give an empty array like this. Okay. So this is how we are going to get the recent searches from the local storage. But how are we going to store them or ensure that they are synced? So we can use the effect primitive in the signals API for this purpose. So let's create an effect here, and we are going to call this effect as save local storage. And the good thing about effect is that it's perfectly syncs with the signal. So whenever the signal changes, the effect is called. So here what we're going to do is window.local storage dot set item, and we're going to do recent searches as the key as we set previously, and then we are just going to send the recent searches signal here. Obviously it says that you can't really set that value because it should be a string, so we are going to do json.stringify to store this inside of this. Great. So now let's test this out, and now when we see, it seems that I already had some prior recent searches in my browser, so it has fetched those. And now when we delete it, you can see, and you refresh it, you can see that it's actually syncing with local storage. Great. So now this is much more useful for the user. And let's try out adding something as well. So let's add hello here, and you can see we get hello here. And when we refresh the app, you can see we have hello in our recent searches. Great. Okay, so now all that's left in this basic version of the search bar is to add the close button right around here so that it will allow the user to clear the search term with convenience. It's just a nice little UI touch to it. But before that, let me tell you a bit about my Buy Me a Coffee page. Now, I created a Buy Me a Coffee page some time back to allow people who like my content to support me by donating a small amount. Or you could also head over to the shop. I released the whole source code of these apps that I build in my tutorial videos. So head over to there if you'd like to use those apps directly using my source code instead of building it yourself through these tutorials. Okay, so now let's get back to building our close button. Okay, so to build the close button, we first need to change the styling to accommodate the close button. And you will notice that we had already given some of the padding here in our search bar container. If you are going to go there, search bar component, you will notice that the search bar container contains this 56 pixels of padding here. Now this is specifically to make way for that close button, because otherwise if we don't do that space there beforehand, it's going to increase and decrease the size of the search bar container when the close button appears or disappears. And we don't want the close button to appear all of the time because it doesn't make sense when there is no search entered in the box. And that is exactly how it happens on the Gmail search bar as well. So our padding has already been added, and accordingly we adjusted the width of the overlay as well in its padding as well. So that is done. Now all we need to do is to add an absolutely positioned close button here. So let's do that. And let's go to the search bar container here, and right up to the input, we are going to add an if condition using the new control flow. And in this if condition, we are going to refer to our search term. So if this search term has a value or a non-truthy value, which means it's not an empty string, then we are going to show our close button here. This is also going to be an icon button. And within this, we are going to add our icon, the close icon. But we do need to position this correctly. So we are also going to give it a class of close. So let's adjust the class here, and we're going to add the close button class here. What we're going to do is we are going to make the position of the search bar container as relative. Then the close button is going to be an absolutely positioned element. These are just some CSS tricks. And the top is going to be 0. And on the right though, we want it to be about 8 pixels. So let's test this out. So it doesn't show anything right now, but once we start typing, or once we actually press enter, we are going to see that there is going to be a nice close button which you can use. Now nothing happens here, so let's add the functionality for it now. Let's go in our close button and let's add a click function here. Also, let's go in our search bar service and let's add a function called clear search. This is going to just clear out the search term, okay? And it's also going to open the overlay. Why? Because when the user actually clears the search term, one of the reasons the user wants to do that is to enter another search term. Okay, we can now clearly go back to our search bar component, clear search here, And here we can just call our search bar service and clear the search. Of course, within the search bar service, you can also do whatever you want to do to clear the search. So you can actually clear the search results here as well. I'm not going to cover that, but you can do that here. Okay, so for the search bar, we have associated the clear search with the button here, and we just need to add a click event handler for it. So let's add this click event handler, and this should work. Let's test this out. So let's say we tell the search to search for Angular, and now let's clear this. And now we clear this, we can now clear this, and we can now use Bing, for example. We can clear it again, we can use Sign, we can clear it again. So it works really nicely. Great. Okay, let's end this now with a very small touch, and that is by using a computed signal. And let's see the power of computed signals and how easy it is to use them. So you'll notice here that we have about 5 recent search terms. Let's add another one. So we're going to add RxJS, and let's add signals as well. And you can now see that our list is getting really large, and that's not how it happens in the original the Gmail style search bar. So there's a specific number of recent terms that are shown, the last 5 or 6 recent search terms. So how to do that in our case? Let's go to our search overlay. You can see that we have our recent searches. So instead of changing the signal itself, we can actually use the computed primitive. So here, this recent searches, which is referring to the search bar service recent searches, what we can do is that we can instead refer it to a computed. And this computed is basically just going to use this dot recent search bar dot recent searches, but it's going to just slice that array. So it's going to slice it from 0, which is the top of it, and is going to give the 5 elements. So let's try this out now. You're going to see that it only gives 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the good thing about signals is we don't need to do anything else to handle extra cases. So for example, when we remove RxJS here, you can see that the last one, the hello one, automatically comes up the list. And when you remove this, you keep removing it, it's going to reduce eventually, but it's going to get your last 5 recent searches in any case. Okay, so I think we are done with this. Now our basic version is complete. Okay, so this basic version is complete, but when I investigated the Gmail app itself, I noticed that it has a few extra features as well. You'll notice that the URL actually contains the search term. And so that means that the search state is basically flowing from the URL itself. So I tried to implement that, and I made an extended version of this app. So in that extended version, what happens is that when you enter a search in the search bar, it actually remembers the state, and it actually navigates to that specific route of the search results. So if you're interested in using this widget in your own apps, the source code is available on my Buy Me a Coffee page, both of the basic version and the extended version with the state flowing from the URL itself. Now this way you can also support me in my content creation efforts in some small way. Thanks for watching, and I hope you learned something new as I did when I started working on this project. And as always, please like, subscribe, and comment for better reach so that this video can reach more developers and more people who are willing to learn Angular. Thanks for watching.